When a police officer looks at you during a traffic stop and asks, "Why are you nervous?" something happens to almost every driver in that moment. They start explaining, "I'm not really nervous. I just get anxious around police. I've had bad experiences before. I'm in a hurry. I've not done anything wrong. I just do not like getting pulled over." Every single one of those explanations feels reasonable. Every single one of them feels like the natural, honest human response to an unfair characterization. And every single one of them is doing something the driver never intended. It is giving the officer new material to work with. Here is what almost nobody knows. The question, "Why are you nervous?" is not a question about your emotional state. It is an investigative technique. It is designed to get you talking. It is designed to produce explanations, details, contradictions, and admissions that the officer did not have 30 seconds ago. And it works almost every time it is asked, because the framing makes silence feel impossible and explanation feel mandatory. The question also does something more specific and more dangerous. It inserts nervousness into the documented record of the stop as an observed fact. Once you engage with the premise, once you explain why you are nervous or deny that you have accepted that nervousness is a relevant factor in this encounter. And nervousness is one of the behavioral indicators officers use to justify extending a stop, requesting a search, or escalating a routine traffic contact into a full criminal investigation. Today, I am going to show you exactly what is happening legally and psychologically when that question lands, why anything you say in response to it can be used to justify what happens next, and the exact words you say before you answer, words that shut down the technique, remove nervousness from the record as a justification tool, and protect you from the moment the question is asked. Hit subscribe right now because this channel gives you the exact knowledge you need before you are ever in the moment where you need it. Share this with one person before this video ends. Someone who would hear that question and immediately start explaining themselves because they are the person this technique was designed for. Here is the reality that most people are never taught. Nervousness during a traffic stop is normal. It is physiologically normal. Your heart rate increases, your hands may shake slightly, your voice may change. These are automatic stress responses that occur in the presence of law enforcement in virtually every human being, regardless of whether they have done anything wrong. Studies on stress response confirm that the presence of authority figures with enforcement power triggers measurable physiological reactions in people with no criminal history, no contraband, and no reason whatsoever to be concerned about the outcome of the stop. Officers know this, and yet nervousness, observed, described, and documented, appears consistently in police reports as a behavioral indicator of potential criminal activity. Shaking hands, avoidance of eye contact, rapid speech, unusual stillness. All of it gets coded as suspicious behavior in the documented record of the stop, and all of it can be cited as part of the totality of circumstances that justified extending the encounter or initiating a search. The "why are you nervous" question is the bridge between the officer observing those behaviors and getting you to confirm them in your own words. Because the moment you explain your nervousness, even innocently, even honestly, you have done three things simultaneously. You have confirmed that nervousness is present. You have provided an explanation for it that the officer can evaluate and potentially contradict. And you have started talking, which means the conversation has a new direction that you did not choose, and that the officer can now guide wherever they need it to go. This is the technique. You are nervous. The question makes you explain the nervousness. The explanation becomes material. The material justifies the next question. The next question produces more material. And the stop that should have ended 3 minutes ago now has a new life built entirely out of words you chose to say because silence felt impossible. Now here is where the legal foundation matters. The Fourth Amendment protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures. The Fifth Amendment protects you from self-incrimination. The Sixth Amendment gives you the right to counsel. These protections exist during a traffic stop. They do not wait for an arrest. They do not activate only when you are formally charged with something. They are available to you from the first second of any police encounter. Choosing not to answer investigative questions during a traffic stop is constitutionally protected conduct. It is not obstruction. It is not suspicious by itself. It is the exercise of a right that every person in this country has, and that most people in this country have never been told they can use during a routine stop. The Supreme Court addressed the relationship between silence and guilt in Salinas versus Texas from 2013. The ruling in that case is nuanced, and the safest approach, the one defense attorneys universally recommend, is to verbally invoke your right to remain silent rather than simply going quiet. Because silent silence and invoked silence are treated differently. When you say the words, when you put the invocation on the record, the protection is explicit and documented, which brings us to exactly what you say. When an officer asks, "Why are you nervous?" before you explain anything, before you deny anything, before you say a single word about your emotional state, you say this: "Officer, I would prefer not to answer questions without an attorney present." That is the complete response. Calm voice, no attitude, no further explanation after it. Those 13 words do something that no explanation of your nervousness ever could. They invoke your Fifth and Sixth Amendment protections simultaneously. They stop the information flow without confrontation. They put on the record, on the body cam, in the documented encounter, that you understood you had the right not to answer and you exercised it. And they remove nervousness entirely from the conversation you are about to have, because there is no longer a conversation to have. The officer cannot force you to explain your emotional state. Your feelings are not evidence of a crime. Your anxiety in the presence of law enforcement is not probable cause for a search. And your decision not to discuss it is not suspicious behavior that can be added to the totality of circumstances used to justify continuing the stop. Here is what the bad way looks like. Officer notices the driver's hands are slightly unsteady as they hand over the license. Asks, "Why are you nervous?" Driver immediately says, "I am not nervous. I just do not like getting pulled over. Always been like this. I have not done anything wrong." Officer notes the unprompted self-exculpation, the "I have not done anything wrong," which raises a question in the officer's mind about why innocence needed to be asserted without being challenged. Asks a follow-up question. "Where are you coming from tonight?" Driver answers. "Where are you headed?" Driver answers. The stop that was about a rolling stop at a sign is now 7 minutes deep into a conversation about the driver's evening, their route, their destination, and their general demeanor. None of it needed to happen. All of it happened because the driver felt that silence was not an option. Here is what the good way looks like. Officer notices the same unsteady hands. Asks, "Why are you nervous?" Driver looks at the officer calmly and says, "Officer, I would prefer not to answer questions without an attorney present." Officer pauses, may rephrase the question. "I am just asking a simple question. Why are you nervous?" Driver says the same thing again. "I would prefer not to answer questions without an attorney present." Then, silence. The officer has no new material. The nervousness is not confirmed in the driver's own words. The conversation has no new direction. The stop returns to its legal purpose, the rolling stop at the sign, and concludes on that basis. Same hands, same stop, completely different outcomes because of one decision made before the first word of the explanation left the driver's mouth. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever been asked why you were nervous during a traffic stop and started explaining yourself immediately? Yes or no, tell me what you said. I want to know how many people have walked directly into this technique without ever seeing it for what it was. If you are still here, hit the like button because what comes next is the part that ties the legal protection to the physical reality of the stop, and it is the part that makes the technique completely diffused from the moment the question is asked. Let me tell you about the specific ways officers follow up when the nervousness question succeeds, because understanding what comes next is what makes the invocation feel worth it in the moment. When you explain your nervousness, the officer now has several angles to pursue. The first is contradiction. If your explanation does not match something they already observed or know, they have a discrepancy. Discrepancies are used to justify continued questioning and, in some cases, detention. The second is escalation. Your explanation often includes details, where you came from, who you were with, what you were doing, that open new lines of investigation. Details produce more questions. More questions produce more details. The third is documentation. Everything you say goes into the officer's report. The report becomes the foundation of any case that follows. Your explanation of your own nervousness, written in a report by someone trained to make behavioral observations, serve an investigative purpose. Rarely reads the way you intended it when you said it. When you invoke instead of explaining, all three of those angles disappear. There is nothing to contradict. There are no details to pursue. There is nothing to document except that you exercised a constitutional right. And here is the thing that most people do not believe until they understand the legal framework. Invoking your right not to answer questions during a traffic stop does not escalate the encounter. Officers encounter invocations regularly. A calm, clearly stated invocation from a driver who is cooperative with the legal requirements of the stop, handing over documents, staying in the vehicle, is not the same as a confrontational refusal. The tone is everything, and the invocation sentence is designed to deliver the protection without the confrontation. Calm voice. Officer, I would prefer not to answer questions without an attorney present. Then silence. That is the full protocol. That is all of it. Let me tell you about James. James is 37 years old, lives in Georgia, and was stopped for a minor lane change violation on a Friday night. He had come from a work dinner. He had had 2 glasses of wine with his meal 3 hours earlier. He was well within any legal limit. He was also anxious. He had been stopped twice before, and both times the encounters had been tense and uncomfortable. The officer noticed his hands were not steady when he handed over the registration. Asked why he was nervous, James explained. He said he always got nervous at traffic stops. He said he had bad experiences before. He said he had had a couple drinks at dinner, but that was hours ago. He said he was not impaired. He just got anxious. In those 4 sentences, James had confirmed observable nervousness, disclosed alcohol consumption, and provided a self-assessment of his own impairment. The officer now had 3 elements: visible anxiety, disclosed consumption, and a driver-generated opinion about sobriety that together were sufficient to initiate a field sobriety investigation. James passed every test. He was not impaired. He drove home that night. But he spent 40 minutes on the side of the road, submitted to tests he had no legal obligation to take, and experienced an encounter that the officer's report described as a DUI investigation initiated following observations of nervous behavior and driver disclosure of alcohol consumption. His attorney reviewed the stop afterward. His first observation was that nothing the officer did was improper given what James had volunteered. His second observation was that James had volunteered all of it in response to one question he had no legal obligation to answer. James now knows the 13 words. After this video, so do you. There are 3 legal foundations that make the invocation bulletproof. The first is the 5th Amendment. You cannot be compelled to be a witness against yourself. This protection applies during a traffic stop. It applies before arrest. It applies the moment a question is asked that requires you to produce information that could be used against you. Explaining nervousness, including disclosures about recent activity, alcohol consumption, emotional history with law enforcement, is exactly the category of self-produced information the Fifth Amendment exists to protect you from being compelled to provide. The second is Berghaus versus Tompkins from 2010. The Supreme Court held that the right to silence must be affirmatively invoked. Silence alone is not enough. You must say the words. You must put the invocation on the record. That is why the response is not simply staying quiet. It is the specific sentence that names the right and exercises it out loud in a way that is documented and protected. The third is Illinois versus Cabayas from 2005. The court established that a routine stop can expand into a broader investigation if the officer independently observes additional suspicious circumstances. Your words, your explanation of your nervousness, your disclosures, your self-generated details are circumstances. Every word you say in response to the nervousness question is a potential additional circumstance that can justify expanding the scope of the stop. Invoking removes those words from the equation before they exist. When you understand these three cases together, the 13-word sentence stops being a legal abstraction and becomes the most practical protection available to you in that specific moment. Here's the complete recap of everything you now know. The question, "Why are you nervous?" is an investigative technique designed to get you talking, confirm nervousness as an observed fact in your own words, and produce material the officer can use to justify extending the stop. It is not a question about your emotional state. It is a tool. Your answer to it is not an explanation. Your answer is this: "Officer, I would prefer not to answer questions without an attorney present." Calm, clear, delivered once, repeated if the question is rephrased, followed by silence. That sentence invokes your Fifth and Sixth Amendment protections simultaneously. It puts the invocation on the record. It removes nervousness from the conversation. It stops the information flow without confrontation, and it leaves the officer with no new material to use as justification for anything that follows. After you say it, you say nothing else. Nothing about why you were nervous, nothing about where you came from, nothing about what you had to drink, nothing about your history with law enforcement, nothing. You look at the officer calmly and you wait. Think about one person in your life right now. Someone who gets anxious around police, someone who over-explains when they are nervous, someone who would hear that question and immediately start talking because silence felt impossible and explanation felt like the only way out. That person is exactly who this technique is designed for. Share this video with them today, not later, right now before you close this tab. The 13 words you just learned are the exact thing that could keep their anxiety from becoming the justification for everything that happens next. Next week, I am breaking down what happens when an officer says they need you to come with them to the station voluntarily. What voluntary actually means in that context, what rights attach the moment you get in that car, and the exact sentence that forces the officer to declare whether you are under arrest or free to go before you take a single step. Subscribe so you catch it the day it drops. Hit the like button if these 13 words just changed how you will handle the next time an officer tries to make your nerves into evidence. Drop a comment right now telling me whether you knew before today that you had the right not to explain your emotional state during a traffic stop. I read every single comment, and I want to see how many people this is landing on for the first time. Know your rights, use them, stay safe.